Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to the SafePass webinar series. My name's Emma and I'm on the marketing team at SafePass, and we're delighted to have Brian O'Neill with us today from Appsurance. We do have a question and answer session at the end, so feel free to send over any questions you may have in your control panel, and we'll get to those after the session. So Brian, if you'd like to give a quick introduction, and then we can dive straight into the questions.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Brian O'Neill, the founder CEO of Appsurance. Been in the continuous controls monitoring space actually before that term was even coined. Started in the space in 1996. And been delivering, controls solutions, application security solutions to our clients around the world ever since. I started the company in 2004. Previously, I was with Oracle. I started my career actually at Oracle and was a consultant with them implementing. I actually I'll date myself here, but my first Oracle implementation was actually version 10.5 character. It was a green screen mode way back when. And then from Oracle, I went to Ernst & Young and led their global Oracle security and controls practice before starting Appsurance in 2004.
Okay, thank you, Brian. This is Adel Khan, SafePass CEO. I've known Brian for at least 15 plus of those years that he just talked about. We worked together and have a lot of respect for him. So we're glad you're here today to share your best practice and experience with on this webinar with us. My background is also in the governance, risk, and compliance space. We've been helping customers improve their internal controls, making them more automated, continuous monitoring, prevent risk from occurring. So I think between Brian and I, we probably have, gosh, if I were to guess, probably 300 plus customers, Oracle customers, where we have helped them in some way or form, helped them improve controls. So we're really excited to share our insight and experience over the last 15 years, with Oracle and Oracle customers, helping them improve controls. We got into the business about the same time and founded companies. So Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit about Appsurance?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, so Appsurance, our sole purpose is assisting companies in the design, implementation, review, remediation of all things related to security and controls from an Oracle perspective. And when I use the term Oracle, I talk about the Oracle suite, so ERP Cloud, EBS, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, NetSuite, and the like. So more specifically, as companies are either running Oracle, implementing Oracle, upgrading Oracle, we work with the business process owners, with management, with the audit staff to take a look at controls either in place or desired controls, and then try to find that optimal mix of manual and automated type controls to give them the coverage they're looking for. Our resources at Appsurance, we have quite a bit of experience. Everybody that works here has done multiple implementations of continuous controls managing software implementations. We have many years of experience in the space. We've been fortunate to work with companies around the world, so not just here in the US, but have actually delivered these solutions to over customers in over 30 countries. So depth and breadth of experience. So hopefully we bring the right mix to our clients, many of which are on the call today. So I think that's a good sign.
Fantastic. Now, welcome all our joint clients and those that are interested in learning more about this important topic. So yeah, just a quick background on SafePass. We've been in the space also about 15 some years. We took a slightly different route about 5 years ago. We felt like the market needed a strong governance, risk, and compliance platform where Oracle was exiting the market. So we kind of took all that best practices and knowledge that we had built and put that into the platform, where Gartner recognized us as one of the most complete solution for segregation of duties, for continuous controls monitoring, roles management. And we're really fortunate to be invited to many of the leading events around the world to present our solutions to customers and help them solve their problems. We have customers on 5 continents that use SafePass today, so we're really proud of our customers for enabling us to become this successful in a short period of time that we became a product company. I've also written some of these best practices into a book that I co-authored with Nigel King from Oracle, who was one of the founders of the Oracle Internal Controls Manager product that came out in the market very early days, back in 2002-ish, I think it was, right after Sarbanes-Oxley. So that book also talks a lot about the best practices and lessons learned of traveling on many continents and working with many countries to kind of learn really in the trenches and then share those experiences with our customers. And we do that through these webinars and well, physical events when there's no COVID. So with that, we'll jump right into the agenda. You guys can see this. I'll let Emma, you MC the meeting, and this is kind of an informal panel discussion, so we can share our ideas and leverage Brian's expertise in this area.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So we're going to dive straight right in and start off with what we consider to be the top controls challenges that ERP customers face today. Brian, if you'd like to, Adil, share some insight there.
Yeah, I can jump in first. I mean, I think the bullet points that are noted on the slide here are all clearly applicable, but I think it goes a little bit beyond that too, in terms of more granular, in terms of where are you in the process of your ERP evolution within your organization. Most companies today, I would say the vast majority of organizations, particularly those on the call today, have an ERP in place, whether it be Oracle or SAP or PeopleSoft, JD Edwards or the like. So the challenges, would be, first of all, directionally, where are you going as an organization with your current ERP? Are you upgrading, for instance, to EBS 12.2.9? Are you going to move to ERP Cloud? Are you looking to do something, altogether different? So I think based upon that answer, would then determine your next move in terms of, how you want to address any of the challenge that you may have today and how you're going to address them given the new or upgraded ERP environment. I would also talk about this. Another point is just in light of the current, COVID-19 situation, another challenge our clients are having is, unfortunately, several of our clients have had to reduce their workforce. And so they now have fewer people doing transactional activity than they had even, a month ago or 2 months ago. So I can tell you in the last several weeks, we've had multiple clients reach out to us to confirm that they had coverage with their controls monitoring solution in place, particularly from an SOD perspective, because they now have fewer individuals performing transactions. They just want to make sure that the controls monitoring solution was actually looking for those types of user activity that they would want to highlight, given that users are now going to have some additional access that they didn't have even, a few weeks ago. So those two things from, where you are in your ERP evolution, where you are, and how your organization has responded to the current COVID situation, I think are two additional challenges that kind of come off of these few bullet points here. Adil, I don't know, how about yourself?
No, I agree with those points. I think that this unfortunate, pandemic has created more pressure on organization to do more with less, and continuous controls monitoring is one way to accomplish that. I think one thing that I liked about your point is, kind of where's your direction as an ERP player. So just to add to that, I think for those of you that are using a platform like an Oracle or an SAP, one of the things that customers are sharing with us as challenges is that it's not that they don't have good internal controls. Most of our customers come to us because they already have interest in controls and they have good controls. It's just that the cost and the burden of managing those controls has significantly increased over time, not just because of pandemic, which is the current trend, but it's been kind of building up over the last decade, if you will, where you had smaller systems, you had more controls built into a single ERP system, but now you have data everywhere, right? You have cloud applications, you may HCM may be running in cloud, you may have an IDM system that feeds into your ERP system. So from a system standpoint, it's very difficult for companies to provide that assurance of their internal controls effectiveness without having some kind of a continuous monitoring process. And CFOs and audit committees don't like surprises, as we all know on this call, right? So it's just no longer acceptable to go into an audit committee and say, well, we had this finding because we didn't know. So I think that's ultimately what we get brought in, is to help eliminate that possibility of surprises, right? So when you're continuously monitoring it, and then when the issues come out, the other challenge that we hear about a lot is, well, yes, we knew about these issues, but we just didn't have time to get them all remediated before the period end or whatever your audit cycle is. And that's how it escalates, right? So by giving that information in plain English to the process owners and control owners that auditors can observe independently and managers can agree and attest to, I think creates that a streamlined effect within your control environment because you're more proactive. So I think those are some of the challenges that we'll talk a little bit about how we can address with best practices that Brian has vast knowledge of, and some of the product capabilities that SafePass has built over the last few years.
Yep, some great insight there.
Let me just add one more thing that the last bullet point there addressed is talk about cost. And we've had a number of conversations with customers around looking for the continuous controls solutions, the automated controls to kind of reduce audit cost or compliant cost. While that's, I think, definitely a goal and should be something to strive for, I typically push back and say, rather than looking at it merely as possibly lowering costs, a huge win would be preventing future cost increases. So if you can freeze, the fees associated, from an IT audit perspective or an external audit perspective around, IT general controls, application controls, etc., on a go-forward basis, that's a huge win, because what it does then, it'll put the onus on the auditors to justify why they want to increase your audit fees or compliance fees in the future, knowing that you now have a continuous controls monitoring solution in place, which should result in them really having to do less and less testing, less and less work. So trust me, we all try to use these solutions to lower compliance costs. I get that. But also don't forget that if you can freeze where your compliance fees, audit fees are today for future use, for future years, that's also a huge win.
Great point. Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Yes, so let's move on to, well, let's start at the very beginning. So how can we define continuous controls monitoring? What is continuous controls monitoring?
Well, I'll take a first stab at it again. So from my perspective, continuous controls monitoring is having a tool in place to provide visibility to information, to eliminate surprises, all right, and ultimately to hopefully reduce or freeze compliance costs. Now, I know this is Gartner's official definition, but I think from a practical perspective, it's what I stated earlier.
Absolutely.
Dale?
So just to add to that, Emma, I would say that when we talk to our customers about continuous monitoring, what they're telling us is that, we really would like to figure out the controls across our process, right? So they've done a risk assessment. Let's pick on financial controls because that cuts across all organizations. So you've gone through your financial close process, your disclosure process, and you've come up with all these key controls that you need for the SOX mandate, but also for better governance and all those good reasons why companies need those controls. So as a result of that, when you come up with those risks, for example, timely disclosure, and certain types of entries requiring approval, others requiring reconciliation and variance analysis to back that up, those kinds of controls are complex, and they're usually performed under pressure, right? So it's not just about the transaction, which I think Gartner highlights here, but it's also about the entire process 360 view, right? Which in the case of an ERP customer, it means those configurations like approval hierarchies that enable people to approve certain set of journal entries, right? It means approval authority. You know, what's the approval workflow? I mean, so who approves what workflow? And sometimes customers run into bottlenecks, even though these controls exist in your ERP. But what you find is that, you know, your process requires a multiple level of approval and depends which journal the entry is in. So it becomes more contextualized, granular. And sometimes some ERPs don't offer that, and that creates findings and control defects. So it's about the complete process beyond the transaction. Transaction is the most obvious one, but we also need to monitor the master data. We need to monitor you know, key configurations, and of course, transactions like, you know, certain journal entries that were made at certain point. Similarly, if you look at procure-to-pay process, you might find that you know, there's some fraud risk there, some cash leak risks there. So the timeliness of those transactions is also very important. And we'll talk a little bit about a case study of a client that I recently worked with later on in the presentation to highlight those points further. So with that, we'll move on. You go ahead.
Well, one other thing I just want to add is, you know, I've had conversations with you know, I'll get introduced to an organization and I'll ask them about, you know, their continuous controls monitoring and what if they've, you know, if they have implemented a tool or evaluated a tool, or if they, you know what continuous controls monitoring is. And I've actually got a response saying, well, we have continuous controls monitoring. And so I'll dive into that a little bit deeper, and they'll say, well, you know, every quarter we check certain configurations with an Oracle, and every quarter we manually review that the responsibilities assigned to the users haven't changed, or that, you know, and so we have the discussion around that. Oh, well, you are, I guess, continuously monitoring that particular control or those particular settings. The challenge that comes in as well, in those 90 days between, or, you know, you checking the configuration, how many times did that configuration possibly change that you don't have visibility to, that the tolerances were changed from 10% to 2% to 20%, or that the responsibilities assigned to a user or roles assigned changed during that time. So the conversation ultimately gets to, you know, there are solutions on the market, SafePass, that run in the background, and they're proactively monitoring for you, so that they're then alerting you when any of those things change, so that you're not having to manually go in and hope that the setting that was there 90 days ago is still the same setting and that nobody changed it in between.
You know, that's definitely a great point. And I often use the example of suppliers, right? When you go to supplier page in an ERP system, you can change the supplier bank account if you have access, and many people do, because that's part of their job or their IT support. And then I can change, so the payment gets processed and I change it back during those 90 days that you talked about, Brian. And the only thing that you'll see at the end of those 90 days is the correct status, but in between there's a lot of changes that have occurred. And you know, as we're becoming more and more digital, you know, we're giving people more access to data, and they have the more opportunity to cause that type of, whether it's just a simple error or a fraudulent problem or whatever it might be, you know, that's down the line. But yeah, those frequencies of control testings that are in most risk control matrices don't often match with the operational risk or even financial risk for that matter. So that's why I think this is something, Emma, you put together for us. So when we think about manual control, and this is a simple way to understand, is, you know, it's that unpleasant surprise that I was talking about that CFO or the audit committee gets, just like if you find out you need a root canal, nobody's excited about that. And automated, the idea is to help you basically, you know, keep that problem from happening. So our attempt at a little humor here.
Well, let me give you an example though. I think they're actually on the webinar here today, so they'll keep me honest in me giving you this example. You know, we're working with a client in the Southeast here. It's a company that every individual on this webinar knows. It's a household name company around the world. But their manual, it's around supplier changes. So they have a process, it's a manual control process in place to where any supplier change has to go through a manual approval process. All right. So in April, one of this company's largest suppliers, they received a phone call from an individual supposedly from this vendor, stating that they changed their bank account, and they wanted my client to update their Oracle environment to reflect the new bank account.
Right.
My client, as part of their controls, requires that they then send that request on letterhead, stating, they have documented proof of the request and some additional documentation. Then that documentation is then forwarded on to the corporate controller before the change in Oracle. So that's their manual control. All right. So go back to April. This organization also has a continuous controls monitoring solution like FastPath, and once a week we send the corporate controller a list of vendor bank accounts that were inserted or updated during the preceding week. And the corporate controller got a report and said, I don't remember approving this vendor bank account change. So she went to the person and said, oh yeah, I got a request, I got the letterhead, I just went into Oracle and made the change. Well, come to find out, when the controller called the client, they didn't request the bank account change. Somebody had fraudulently called in, sent a fraudulent request on fake letterhead, and the person within our client went in into Oracle and updated the bank account. Well, this is a vendor that they do a tremendous amount of business with, so they're continually cutting checks and direct deposits into this vendor's account. So unfortunately, they ended up to the tune of several $100,000 that were incorrectly deposited to this fraudulent account. But the good news is it was caught, and we were able to prevent future deposits going into this fraudulent account. And now, as you can imagine, the proper authorities have been in place to investigate what happened.
Yeah.
But so my point is, this slide is right on. So they do have, this company, like most, they do have a manual control in place around vendor bank accounts. But thankfully, they were proactively monitoring changes using a tool to then kind of supplement that manual control. In this case, just in April, they found that they unfortunately were, defrauded of several $100,000 because of this event.
Absolutely. What a great example, unfortunate example, but that's back to your point about cost, not only the cost of audit, but also losses that result from risk being materialized. It's something that justifies this kind of a solution.
Yeah, to that point, 2 days later, we had a call with the controller who wanted to know what additional things they could do given, because that was all the proof she needed, that they needed to be doing more in this space.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's something that we see all the time. We hear about it all the time in the news, and stories that come up on our feeds. And so anyway, so moving on to the next question. So what are the drivers behind continuous controls monitoring, and why is now more than ever a good time to invest in a solution for continuous controls monitoring?
Yeah, so I'll start. Everything listed here is 100% correct. But I think, Adil, what you said earlier, I think is the most important driver, and that is to eliminate surprises. I mean, nobody, wants to be surprised with, a control weakness, or in this case, a fraud, anything like that. A related story. So outside of work, I'm a high school basketball coach. It's my way of giving back to the community. It's something I've done for my whole, since, actually before I even got into doing this, I was a college basketball coach. So it's just kind of what I've always done. But I bring that up for two reasons. Is we only have, as a team, every year, we only have two rules. The first rule is no distractions, and the second rule is no surprises. Whether it be, coach, I can't make practice, and he's letting me know 5 minutes before practice starts, or coach, I'm going to fail this class, or a teacher comes and says, well, your player wasn't in class today. So our rules are no distractions, no surprises. And I think this applies to the drivers behind continuous controls monitoring, is to do everything you possibly can to eliminate surprises. And I would also say the other driver for me that I emphasize with our clients is having tools like this in place puts you in a position of strength with the internal and external auditors. More specifically, rather than always being reactive to the requests that come in from the auditors. Most of us on this call, have been dealing with auditors for many years. In some cases, you even are the auditors. I know there's probably some on this call that work for the PwCs of the world. And so whether you're the auditor or the auditee, you tend to have a set of things that are required, audit after audit, year after year. So having a tool like this allows you to take what the past requirements were, make sure that those items are covered, but then take it to the next step and be able to anticipate what might be requested of you going forward. So again, talk about earlier about maintaining or containing cost. I think this is one way to do it. So for me, it's a deal. It's to eliminate surprises and really put you in a position where you can proactively talk to the auditors as opposed to being in a reactive mode and always scurrying to find what they ask you to look for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And just to add to what you said, Brian, is one of the things that our customers tell us, when we think about business drivers in the sales cycles, is either they have that burning platform issue, which you sort of alluded to in your previous slide, where that somebody had a fraud event occur, they had a loss event occur, and now they're looking for what else can we do to get a completeness test basically across end-to-end our processes. And that's the more common, I guess, business driver that we hear from our customers, that they've had an event and now they've been mandated by the audit committee and board that we don't want any of these surprises again. We certainly don't want it to turn into a reputation risk where we read about it in the papers, right? So there are those very like obvious drivers, but then there's also many of you on this webinar maybe just looking at we don't have one of those issues, but we still think this is a good idea. So where do we start? And we'll talk a little bit about the selection process, and like I said, I'll share a case study as well. But one of the things you may want to think about, especially right now where we are with remote work and still having the same audit requirements, is to kind of look at your control risk matrix and again look at it from your perspective. Where are you spending time on testing these controls, and whether they're controls for compliance and or they're general operational controls including fraud and so forth. And is there anything you can do to take advantage of a technology like this where you can streamline the process now, and not only just think of it as the most obvious thing which we're talking today is risk, but also improving performance, right? Some of our customers are using, I'll give you an example of a customer that uses this to improve their revenue cycle. So what happens is they're in a process manufacturing business, and when they run out of certain chemicals in their recipes, they can't complete the product and ship it out the door, and therefore it impacts the revenue. And people are concerned right now about revenue recognition issues, revenue being down because of various reasons, including people were not traveling as much and spending as much on food and entertainment, or whatever those reasons are. So I'm thinking about those people that are impacted with this pandemic most, which is in our service industry, food and beverage industry right now. And so many of those organizations are trying to figure out where do we go next. Farmers are having to destroy some of their crops and so forth. So if you are in process manufacturing, one of the examples that I just presented is not about the risk of fraud or risk of compliance, which most of us are, I guess, preaching to the choir here. But I think improving performance or controlling that, top line risk as well. If you're having to, you can't ship the product because you can't get your supply chain working because it's impacted with some other information. So those are some of the drivers that I'm seeing customers starting to bubble up with us. Is that, yeah, in the past you've done a good job for us helping improve our compliance stuff and help us check off our audit box and so forth. But now they're coming to us and saying, can you help ensure that our customers are getting what they need in time? And we have this invisibility issue around our supply chain, and can you help us identify those risks too? And so continuous monitoring is primarily about controls, but those controls sometimes are also helping you improve your operations as you're adjusting to the day-to-day business cycle, I guess. So that's just another angle of looking at it. Maybe you have some thoughts on that, Brian?
No, I agree with everything. Everything you said, I think are all very, very valid points. I would just say that a lot of our clients, they've for the most part, done a pretty good job on the financial risk perspective. A lot of ours in the recent past and now are looking more at the operational type risk, and where these, you mentioned the supply chain issue, so I think that's spot on.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, think about what can you get out of this presentation today, and then talk to Brian, talk to me. We'll be glad to share our vast experience and help you put together a business justification that's specific to your business. But with the number of customers we work with, we have pretty much a good repository of those justifications. Whether they are on the slide or not, that we can work with you and help you build a business case. And then I think I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I think, a case study, which I'd like to discuss with you. But Emma, if you want to just pick up here.
Yes, okay, so now we've heard about the drivers. What are the actual benefits of continuous controls monitoring, and more importantly, across the different departments within an organization?
Well, if we start with kind of down for management, I think we said the benefits are eliminate the surprises and the visibility to information. In management, slightly different view of data than you would be from like a module owner or a process owner, but they still want that summary information available to them so they can make the appropriate decisions going forward. From a compliance perspective, I think it's simply, you having a tool or set of tools to allow you to automate some of the things that you have had to do manually in the past. I think the same is true for the auditors as well. From an auditor, it's a little bit different. Auditors are there to test to confirm the controls management says are in place are actually performed and are effective. So in the terms of a continuous control solution, they can basically in real time more or less see the results to if the business owners state that users access to Oracle is approved, they can go through the CCM solution and determine which users were added over a period of time, then go back and make sure that user's access was approved, and to confirm that control was operating, it was in place and operating effectively as designed. And then from an operations team perspective, it's a slightly different. We do a lot of work in the supply chain area, and they want to make sure that the controls that they believe are in place are actually operating it as they thought they were. Adil, do you want to take this in more detail?
Yeah, Brian, actually, I have an interesting question that maybe you can help me address for the folks. One of the things that I get is the pushback from auditors, and you spend more time auditing in this world. So I'd love to hear your perspective when you were an external auditor or even an internal audit. There seems to be that independence issue that comes up when you talk about continuous controls monitoring. Well, who owns the control and who should do what? And I know we have some questions for the team later on to ask as well. But one of the challenges that I hear from our customers when they're thinking about buying a controls monitoring solution like ours is who's going to own it. And while auditors are proponents of that, they also have to maintain independence if they want external auditors to rely on their information. So having set that up for you, is a question for me, for you that I'd like to ask and learn from you is, what should people do when they're thinking about putting a business case together of benefits? I mean, should auditors own this solution, or where do you see this happening when you're involved in helping customers choose a solution like this?
That's the $1 million question, and it's a great question because every one of our customers struggles with that specific question. Where does ownership lie? And for that very reason, as Appsurance, we actually have a service line where we have a number of our customers that actually have outsourced or co-sourced their continuous controls monitoring solution to Appsurance. And the reason for that, and I'll get more into detail in a second, is simply because they can't find that group or that individual that isn't a control owner, isn't responsible for performance control, and or isn't responsible for auditing the control. So they don't know, they don't have that individual or group. So they said, okay, well, Appsurance, you're an independent third party. You're none of the above. You're not management, you're not a compliance, you're not auditor, you're not on operations. So therefore, let's leverage your expertise and kind of co-own this for us. So to start, the controls have to be owned by the business. Oftentimes, I think the misconception is that the audit staff kind of owns the controls, and as I stated earlier,
Right.
That's simply the case. They can't. And their job as auditors is to make sure that the controls that the business process owners state are in place. The auditor's job is to test that those controls are operating effectively. So from that perspective, I think we can't, when there is a control failure, you can't blame the auditors. I mean, the auditor's job is to find the weaknesses within the control environment and to report it accordingly. Really, the ownership has to lie, and in my opinion, should always lie with the business process owners.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of, I think for those audience that are looking at moving to a more streamlined way of monitoring their controls, I think that would be a good starting point. It's not just about the benefits that each of these silos receive, which they all do, as Brian, you said a few minutes ago, but it's also the ownership of, that capability. And sometimes, as you said, it may not be in-house. It may be something that, Brian, you'll have to step in and do that. And I love that answer about process owners taking. It's music to my ears. But the fact is, process owners are not always mature enough to take ownership of that, right? With all respect to process owners, they have a plate full of things. So what we find is many times they do need to bring in someone like Appsurance in to help them ease into that sustainable stage where the process owners can be given, their risk profile in a way that they can consume and understand, and I think that gives them a nice ramp up into the world of continuous controls monitoring. So if you think about benefits, I would say that take that advice from Brian about how to organize the ownership of this system also, because that'll drive you to a solution that is more sustainable long term.
Yeah, a couple other points I'll just add very quickly is one of the dilemmas there's two scenarios where our clients struggle with, more very specific. One is, they often ask, can the person who is managing security for us in Oracle, like our Oracle sysadmin, is it okay if they also kind of own, SafePass and the operations of SafePass? And I'm like, I wouldn't recommend it, simply because those that are proactively managing security within your Oracle environment shouldn't also be the one that then is monitoring that person's and other person's access. So you want an independent third party. The other thing is it's specific around, configuration controls. Is it okay then if, so I understand the sysadmin can't own this, but how about people who their only job is to manage, configure the power users? They can just manage configurations. And my answer is the same. Why would you want somebody who can manage the configurations within GL and AP and AR and purchasing also be the ones responsible for monitoring changes to those same parameters? And typically the light bulb goes, okay, I see your point.
Yeah, so there's a alliance issue there. Yeah.
So and then I just warn them, say, look, if you want to do that, ultimately that's up to you. But just understand, when audit comes in and sees how this is structured, they're going to have a problem with it. So we oftentimes will work and develop what we call a governance model, and we follow the RACI model, responsible. Where we
out of my mouth, I was just thinking that.
Yeah. So we clearly come up with it. And again, we have several clients on the call here where here are all the tasks that need to be in place to operate continuous controls monitoring solution, on a weekly, quarterly, annual basis. And then going across each task, we identify who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, so that there's clear ownership and delineation between the tasks that need to be performed, manual and otherwise, and then who's responsible for doing that.
Yeah, I would ask the folks on the call to take you up on that, because I think that's the only way to put a good business case together and bring ownership into the organization, because there's a lot of technology out there that you have an option to buy. That's the good news. but how you use it and how it creates benefit. I think that RACI matrix is how I've seen customers. The difference between success and failure, it boils down to how you allocate that accountability within the organization.
And one of the things,
So with that,
make sure
we'll talk a little bit about an example. Go ahead. Let you close.
My only guidance, and you can go on, is just make sure that in those conversations, that when you develop your RACI model, the governance model, that you're including your procurement, more of the operations folks, manufacturing folks, procurement folks, because again, they do have operational risks that they want to make sure that is addressed in this endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm guilty of that. I often overlook, when I'm doing a business justification, I often overlook those, downstream areas of business, and they're not in, in the conference room or in today, Zoom meeting or whatever we have. But
right.
But they get left out, but they bring a lot of contribution to these areas where, they're not that close to the financial statement risk, so we kind of don't pay that much attention. But folks in supply chain are becoming much more important. Customer service is tremendously important. Right. So I think that's something that maybe consider as an added benefit given the circumstances we have right now. So with that, I'm just going to share an example, Brian, of a customer that we recently worked with, try to sum up some of the things you've said about what to look for and how to justify. So the purpose of this is to a customer that has recently gone through it, to help you as a reference, and maybe even, if you're interested in learning more, we can have you talk to these or many other customers. We have about 200 some customers now, so it's been a rapid growth opportunity for us. So I wanted to kind of share on why they selected a CCM solution, see if it resonates with you. Companies, as I said earlier in the presentation, is that most companies that come to us, I'd say all companies that come to us have good internal control. It's not that they're against internal control, it's just that they're in Excel or some other method. Excel to me is a manual step, right? Because 90% of whatever Excel workbooks have some errors or the other. And then you've got, in this case, this company provides global telecom, so they're in Africa, they're in Latin America, and they have many silos and business units. They're all running a single operating system on Oracle e-business suite, and they have a little bit of cloud. So what they were looking for is a way to bring all those spreadsheets down into a single dashboard that the executives could see, to avoid those quote unquote surprises that Brian and I just talked about. So they had basically a ton of different ways to audit things, but they couldn't coalesce that in a way that the external auditors and the audit committee could get comfortable. So that was one of the key drivers for them for CCM, is because when you work with SafePass, you can go against multiple data sources where your controls are and start monitoring them immediately and put all that data into a common dashboard, which you can display within SafePass or push it out to a third-party dashboard that if you like, Tableau or whatever you like. So that was kind of the main drivers for them. The second thing that I've again talked about it earlier in terms of challenge is collaboration. So because this company spread out, like most of our clients are in many regions, continents, time zones, languages, cultures, all that put together. So that creates silos, not only from a departmental perspective like finance and supply chain and procurement, but also just collaboration because of time zones and so forth. So the challenge was for their governance team to proactively manage risk, right? So being able to, again, avoid those surprises. And they had some issues in the past. They operated in a high risk environment. And so they wanted to mitigate those risks in the future, but more than that, prevent those risks from happening. So their governance team created that RACI matrix that we just talked about, and created a global collaboration team. They did move to a global process owner model, which not every company can do. I understand. If you're a holding company with a lot of different segments of your business, you may not be able to do that, and we support that too. But because their business is primarily in the telecom and media space, they were able to bring together a global governance team with centralized accountability and using SafePass as a agent of change to bring that change into a single platform. So the governance team could then set global guidelines, for example, for invoice tolerance levels or approval hierarchies on journal entries and journal entry process and reconciliation standards and so forth. And that's kind of the top right corner now, standardization of the approach. because it's also difficult and frustrating for management when, you know, they put all these great controls in and the auditors still can't seem to understand. And that's the management perspective that I get to hear, is that why don't our auditors simply understand that we have good controls in? And it's because there's no global design that they can understand. The auditors themselves may have multiple teams working in different regions, and so they're not on the same page, right? So it becomes the burden for the company, as Brian, you said, about cost, not just now, but also the future cost, which tends to go up as the audit gets more complex and organizations evolve. So being able to come to that common lingo, the common controls framework, by having it on a single platform like SafePass, you are able to then achieve that global standards that help you reduce the cost and prevent future costs. Also, the last point on the bottom right corner I'll talk about is the scalability. In today's business world, our customers want agility. They want to be able to shut down a business unit if it's not profitable, open a new one that is trending up, acquire companies, diversify, divestitures, and all that, right? So for that level of flexibility, they need to be able to have automated solution that are scalable, right? So once you define a three-way match or approval hierarchy, they should be able to drop it into a new business unit they've acquired and put it, whether it's running SAP or Oracle or cloud or whatever they're running, you want to be able to do that. And you still want to be able to perform that segregation of duty analysis across those business units, across those platforms. And that's one of the key drivers why they selected SafePass, because SafePass is multi-platform. And so we're able to go against SAP and Oracle and provide them cross-functional type capabilities as part of their roadmap in the future. And so those are some of the business drivers. They may or may not be relevant to you, but you know, each customer has their own case. And like I said earlier, that that if you can look at that ownership matrix that Brian laid out for us in the previous slide, and then kind of think about the drivers that are specific to your business, you know, you can get a pretty good idea of the justification that's going to be valuable to your board of directors and your management team. So that's a little case study. I always like to share these because, you know, we spend a lot of time talking to customers, and I think the most valuable deliverable we can bring to you these webinars is some real world story. So that's my contribution after, you know, Brian, you covered a few of your examples very eloquently earlier. So I'll, with that, move on. Brian, do you have any questions or comments on this? Do you, anything surprise you here, or?
No, I would add, I would just, you know, add on to what you said about the cross-platform, because we're not working with a single customer today that as they evaluate their current or planned continuous controls monitoring solution, the number one requirement is it must be cross-platform. Because whether they have various applications, target applications today, or they want the flexibility for in the future, you know, the days of having for instance, an Oracle only continuous controls monitoring solution is over. And fortunately, SafePass is quite robust and is able to you know, natively connect to any number of target enterprise applications. So I was glad you mentioned that, because that is absolutely the number one request we get now, is that the solution must be cross-platform.
Great point. Yeah, I mean, agility is so important to businesses today. They don't want to get locked into a dead-end solution where they have to rip it out and replace.
Well, that's the, well, you know, we work with a number of organizations that are, you know, even in this current environment, they acquire companies continually. You know, some one or two every single year. And the target organization can run any number of ERP applications, and they have to have the ability to almost immediately plug into that organization's environment when the transaction closes, and do you know, manage their control environment accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that goes down to control coverage. And I think you've sort of segued us into our next question that I was about to ask. We've been sort of moving towards this. So how do you choose a solution like this? So there's a few bullet points, but I'd love to, Emma, for you to.
Yes, so as you said, Adil, we've kind of touched on this previously, but how do organizations go about choosing a continuous control solution? You know, let's talk about some of the best practices that they should follow.
Well, for me, because we help organizations do that, but everything, all the functionality that you state here is 100% spot on. But I would even take it to a higher level. As I said a minute ago, the cross-platform is an absolute must. Top of mind now is transactional monitoring. Organizations that have done user access and segregation of duties, and in some cases configuration controls, that's all well and good. I think they've actually done a pretty good job there. But now they want to take it to the next level, and typically we get the comment of, well, we've through our SOD analysis, we identified X number of users that can do these different types of quote unquote sensitive combinations. And so I will then say, well, then let's put some transaction monitoring to proactively monitor then the transactions that those users perform. And so the functionality you listed here is again spot on, but I think we have to one, determine what applications you want to target, and then that's going to then determine a potential solution. But once you determine a solution, then you want to take obviously a risk-based approach. You just don't want to start throwing darts against the wall and hoping that something sticks. So you definitely want to look at from your high risk areas. I would also advise look at your past audit findings, whether they be internal and external, and let that drive some of the solution from a continuous control solution. All right, but I would emphasize that for me, the choosing above the in-depth functionality is cross-platform, whether it's necessary today or in the future, and you want that flexibility in the future. But then also, you really want to be able to at some point monitor transactional information.
Good suggestion. And again, the bigger picture here is that you need someone like Brian to come in and really talk to you guys about your pain points and help build this that is specific to Spectrum. That's one thing we love about Appsurance is they're able to customize, what works for you and help you select the right solution. And hopefully that's SafePass. But so that's kind of the high level. I wanted to talk about, okay, why do people choose SafePass? So I'll take a slightly different angle on this question. And I've put together this slide on why customers are coming to us for continuous controls monitoring. And obviously the big picture is we want to get more proactive with risk management, right? We talked about surprises. No one likes them, whether it's basketball or business. So let's talk a little bit about why they're coming to SafePass. And I thought about this question, and there's three things I can sum it up in these 3 bullet points. Is one is just to streamline risk management. I know it's a pretty high level term, but what that translates into is that better collaboration, better accountability across that RACI matrix that we looked at. So incident management, it has to be a closed loop workflow, right? So you have a reporting solution today. You may have many reporting solutions today. You have probably the world's best BI tools, but they don't provide you that two-way closed loop risk management today. And that's where SafePass is where customers are coming to us and saying that we want that continuous monitoring to make sure that the right people, as Brian said earlier, the process owners ultimately receive those, as the owners of that risk or control, they receive that information and make it closed loop, right? And then it's got to be based on thresholds, because there are certain risks we're just going to accept. We will have a few people that have access to post journal entries. You can't run a business without that. We'll have a few people that can change bank accounts. So if they do what's typically in their job role, that's fine. But if they go and do something like to set themselves up as a bank, the owner of a bank account for a supplier, then that's a red flag. And that's so also what I'm trying to get to is you want to avoid false positives. That's one of the ways CCM solutions fail, is if they're reporting too many incidents that are false positives. So closed loop is very important. Risk thresholds, certainly dashboards are important, because one controller told me that, look, I want to see the financial risk. That's what I'm responsible for. I don't want for the supply chain risk, give it to the person that's responsible for that. So, you also don't want to overload people that areas of that are not relevant. So being able to customize those incidents, and then maintaining the history. We talked about the stakeholders, the management, the operations, and everything in between audit and compliance. So audit, for example, is very interested in knowing that incident history. The incident was raised, a journal entry was over a certain amount that was outside the comfort level, risk level. So it was reported to the controller, and the controller took the appropriate action and adjusted that entry or resolved that issue with proper backup documentation, and all that was provided. So that's the incident history, which goes back to Brian, your comment earlier about the lowering the future costs, right? Because if those entries are not understood, they will suck up a lot of audit time and remediation time, therefore, as well. And not to mention a surprise again, which is the key issue here. The second bullet point is early detection of potential issues, right? So, many examples we've talked today about, changing parameters, configurations, transactions. And so if you, for example, have a three-way match rule and you identify that somebody broke that three-way match by either turning off that control in your ERP system or perhaps going outside that, transactions somehow were posted outside that. And so being able to apply this fuzzy logic, similar invoice number, similar payment number, similar supply number, all that fuzzy logic is very important. And then building your own algorithms, right? And visualizing that, simulating that to basically what we call advanced analytics is the second bullet point, which helps you detect the potential risk before they materialize. And the last point is around the ability to quickly deploy the solution. So working with our partners like Brian and Appsurance, we're able to leverage the content we have. They have the ability to add more content to it and basically deploy a solution with you in the speed of the cloud world. We run on the cloud, and so there's no technical work required for installation. Brian and his team can really focus it down with you and really focus on your business pain points and how they can be addressed with a solution like SafePass, as opposed to worrying about how much disk you need and all that good stuff, right? So we got best practices controls that folks like Brian and his team can work with you with a deep experience he has to build on. So with that, Brian, I'd like to hear from you on what are things that your customers might be attracted to or areas you might be interested in. And I just realized we only have 3 minutes left.
Quick comment. I would just say this: proactively manage risk. I think it hits on your the bullet point too. Is don't just oftentimes we'll hear, well Brian, in our SOD rules we only have one person that can do it, so we're okay with that. My comment back would be, in all the years I've been doing this, 25 years I've been doing this, and we've worked with many organizations that have identified or fraud. In all but one example, the fraud has happened or been perpetrated by one person. So it wasn't, in one case it was collusion. So the point of telling you that is, you're a control, just because you have only one person that can do a vendor, do an invoice, and do a payment, that's not a control. You still have risk with that one person. So I would say that's where the transaction comes in, transaction monitoring, so that you are monitoring the transactions performed by that particular individual. So I would also say, all of our clients have, super users, power users. I would also, in terms of proactively managing risk, is use a tool like SafePass to identify your sensitive transactions and tag those sensitive transactions to those users, so that at any time one of those users, for instance, were to enter a journal entry, you'd be notified immediately and have visibility to exactly the transaction that user touched. That's proactively managing risk.
Great point. Good contribution on that point. Let's kind of talk a little bit about how we can help you for spending almost an hour with us on this call. So Brian, where should people start? How can you help start this journey?
Well, I think it goes back to our early comments. Honestly, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you looking to do from a continuous controls monitoring solution? Yes, I know you already have ERP controls in place, and you've been on Oracle or SAP for a number of years. I get that.
Brian, just to I think you're cutting out a bit.
Taking a hard look at the control environment you have today, the target application.
Sorry, folks. We'll get Brian to send us a little summary of his.
And then let's sit down and have a conversation about how we can.
Yes, we're losing you, Brian.
Oh, sorry about that. Any better?
Slightly better. What we'll do is we missed some of that useful information. We'll see if you can provide us that in writing, and we'll include that in the webinar material.
Any better, Adele?
Getting slightly better, yes. Do you want to summarize it in a minute or so?
Go ahead.
We're about end of time. Okay, well, I will skip the SafePass marketing slide. This was the only slide I had about SafePass. So if you guys want to learn more about it, reach out to Emma. Let's just do a quick questions. I know we're a minute over. If you guys, these are some of the questions we had received, I guess, Emma, when people registered, right? So
Yes.
at least let's take a couple of questions, and I'd love for Brian's insight to be the value for this webinar. So Brian, do you want to grab a couple of these? The first one, you and I talked about it before the webinar. Maybe you can pick that up, see if we can hear you. Brian?
Yeah, well, let's, I'll go to the, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You're back.
Okay, so the question we get again, a common question is when should we implement the CCM like SafePass? Very simple, the sooner the better. I got to answer. Well, because you can then, whether you're implementing or upgrading, the sooner you can, leverage and integrate these controls monitoring into your environment, the better. Why not start, integrating this into your, dev environments, your U18 environments, your CRP environments, so that it's, by the time you go live, it's already part of what you do as an organization on a daily basis. If you do it after the fact, then you identify at the end you're trying to retrofit. You've already spent a certain amount of time and money getting it to that point. Nobody wants to have to go back and redo something you could have addressed during the implementation or upgrade.
Yeah, and I know those are, I think we didn't touch on that, but you just said that and just kind of triggered something. My thoughts is when you're doing a big upgrade or a transformation project, that's where you can sit down with folks like Brian and me and really talk about making a better justification, because you have the budgets available, you have the business's attention all the way up to the board. And this may be something that we can talk further, Brian, on a future webinar. I'm sorry we run a little bit over, but Brian, we really appreciate your participation. Emma, if you want to close this out, we'll see if we can answer some of these questions online as well.
Yes, we will do. We will follow up. I will follow up in about an hour's time, and you'll receive the recording of the webinar anyway. You have my contact information there on the screen. So if you would like to discuss anything you've heard today in more detail, then please do, reach out to me here at SafePass, and we'll do all we can to help. So yes, a huge thank you to Brian for joining us, and a big thank you to you, Adil, and the audience for joining us today.
Most importantly, yeah, thanks for listening to us. Hopefully it was valuable to you. Okay. Thank you, Brian and Emma.
We'll stay
in touch.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so yes, thank you, and bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.